Hello and welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. I am going to be discussing the economic future of Iran, which is heavily tied to its politics and ruling regime. But before we get into what could cause its current trajectory to change, what we need to explain first is what got Iran into its current situation. There are mainly two things that are holding Iran down. The first is its own bad economic policy, and the second is economic sanctions handed down by the United States, which have spread to the rest of the world. Let's first start with their own troublesome economic policies because the sanctions are a lot more well understood. Uh, Iran is 60% a state owned economy. All of its oil industry is state owned. Uh, there and even outside of the technically state-owned economy, there's a lot of its economy, say up to 20%, is controlled through private charity foundations called banyads. And these charitable trusts are supposed to help distribute social programs. If they're supposed to help cover basic needs and services for the population. But even back since the days of the Shah, these banyads have been used as vehicles to cover up corruption and graft. Uh, you also have with Iran is that uh, Iran has had severe problems again with corruption and not being open to competition. In fact, if you look at Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedom Index, they rate 170th out of 177 countries at the bottom in their region in the Middle East. Uh, the reason is that the court system is rigged to favor the local government, and they make it very difficult for entrepreneurs to compete with state-owned businesses. There is some right to start a business, but if you already have to compete with one arm tied behind your back, it's not really free competition. And this is what has held the Iranian economy down. But the other key picture of this is sanctions. Iran has been heavily sanctioned since the 1979 revolution, but the sanctions, it was really originally just an arms embargo, but it accelerated until a point in 1987 when the Reagan administration effectively banned all U.S. trade with Iran. And this was in response to Iran being a state sponsor of terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas all around the Middle East. And people feared that Iran would use its imported foreign capital, weaponry, and other goods and services to finance terrorist operations and to cause a risk to global security, particularly in a region that the world relied on for its energy needs, especially back before the fracking revolution. So that's how the sanctions originally were placed on Iran. Uh, the Obama administration tried to make a deal to have Iranian normalization of economic relations through the JPCPOA deal. And this deal is that Iran would stop trying to build nuclear weapons and be less belligerent in exchange for the U.S. taking away 150 billion of seized assets and getting rid of a lot of the sanctions and allowing international investment. This brief stretch from 2015 to 2018 was probably the best stretch in the history of Iranian economics in the modern time, where you saw tourism really for the first time in a long time coming to Iran. You saw foreign investment come back in little trickles here and there, and inflation was kept relatively under check, and the Iranian economy had a positive, strong growth. But that was really wiped out in an instant when the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA and Iran went back to being an economic basket case. And so now it has continued to be trapped in sanctions. And there are several consequences to sanctions. First is that Iran really doesn't have anything that the market was really willing to buy to flaunt sanctions other than oil and oil related products. And even though Iran is sanctioned by the United States, an outright trade embargo, and the U.S. really doubled down and said, hey, look, if you want to do business with us as Americans or participate in the American financial system, you can't do any business with Iran. So most the American allies and most countries who want to do business with the United States do not participate either. So really the only thing that is enticing enough to cheat these sanctions is the energy industry. And so the way Iran does this, and I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but they'll sell their oil to neighboring countries and who will rebrand it as their local oil and then sell those off to the global market who needs it, predominantly China. And that is how they get their oil out there. There doesn't mean there's no consequences. The consequence is that they have to sell the oil at a discount to cover all the middlemen who do the laundering, for lack of a better term, of Iranian oil in the global market. Oil is a pretty fungible commodity. And you've seen with the issues with Russian oil, it's very hard to tell whether your gallon of gasoline comes from American oil, Russian oil, Iranian oil, Saudi oil, or Canadian or Mexican oil, or any country that produces oil. It's all oil is oil. So that's how Iran is able to have some sort of exports. So that's kind of how it holds them back. And then just also being unable to import goods or technology or services from the rest of the world just puts them at a huge competitive disadvantage. And there's a lot of negative consequences. First one really is inflation. The Iranian inflation rate is consistently one of the highest in the world. Even at its best was during when the nuclear deal was removed, and it got down to high single digits. But for most of Iran's modern history, inflation has been above 20%. And right now it's sitting at about 54%, according to the Statistical Center of Iran. But that's using official data. It's probably even higher than that. I mean, if you look at the currency, the Iranian rial, it's basically in free fall. You have like the official rate, which started at $1, 1 to 1, right before the revolution. Between then and 2003, it went from 1 rial to a dollar to 8,193 rials to a dollar. And since then, it has gone from 8,193 rials to a dollar to 42,000, which the government has pegged as its official rate since 2018 and the sanctions ended. But inflation has continued to remain out of control there. And so the real exchange rate, like the free black market, whatever you like to call it, rate for the real is closer to 273,000 per US dollar. And the reason why inflation is so high there is because Iran can't really generate enough hard currency revenue because they're kind of blocked out from the international dollar system. And their oil exports aren't enough to cover other needs and goods to the country when they're not allowed to buy those other goods and needs from imports. And they don't produce enough domestically to compensate for it. So the government, in order to fund its activities and social programs, just prints more. And that results in a free-falling currency. That's one main consequence, really, of this. The other thing is that unemployment is consistently double digits in Iran. Industrial production is not very good in Iran. It's generally just GDP growth has underperformed most emerging markets at similar levels of trajectory. The only real economic statistics that are really good for Iran is they have a positive current account, and that's mainly due to the fact that nobody wants to sell them anything more than they're fundamentally a super strong and sound country. And the other thing they have well is the government debt is pretty low in Iran, but I wonder how, I don't really have the numbers on this, but how much of Iran's government debt being low is due to the fact that international creditors aren't willing to buy their bonds on the international government bond market. And so therefore the costs and the interest, especially if like nobody's going to want to probably buy local currency bonds because of inflation there. The interest rates in Iran are only 18%, and the inflation numbers are way higher than that. So that's extreme financial repression. However, even if you could sell dollar denominated bonds, nobody's going to buy them because of the sanctions. So it puts them in a real hard spot. And it's not like Iran doesn't have the potential to be a strong economy. In fact, probably Iran is the biggest sleeping giant of any major economy in the world for a number of reasons. I just like to look at the example as the success of the Iranian diaspora. They rank 10th of any ethnic group in the United States. Their GDP per capita is over 50% higher than the median American of any sort of ethnicity. They have the highest rates of business ownership, with over 21% of Iranian Americans owning their own business, and they have a double the bachelor's degree education rate than the average American as well. They are very successful, and I've seen that in my real life where some of my mentors professionally, actually two of my top mentors professionally, are of Iranian descent. And I went to school with a lot of them that have become successful doctors and lawyers and other upstanding citizens in society. It's the fact that really the reason why Iran is underachieving is not because of lack of human capital. Even with all their problems, Iran is very highly educated for its region. The problem with Iran is that they have a regime that is not willing to get along internationally, and domestically has bad repressive economic policies, and so it holds them down. And we see this in the hard numbers, like the GB per capita in Iran in nominal terms is only $2,700 US dollars per year. And in purchasing power parity, it's closer to 15,000 according to official statistics. But I generally don't like using PPP statistics in general, because who is the one assessing how low the cost of living is in your country to multiply that by? Is living in Iran really like 6 or 7 times cheaper than living in the Midwest of the United States? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't really have any way of proving it one way or the other. And in terms of nominal GDP, they're at the same level as India, but India came from a much lower level to start, and they're far behind other emerging Asian nations such as China, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. And they're behind other Middle Eastern neighbors such as Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So Iran is horribly underperformed. Like their entire economy, given how even with 80 plus million people, is smaller than Tennessee, which is not really known for being the powerhouse. I mean, Nashville has become a trendy city recently, and Memphis is a hub of cotton, and good barbecued ribs. But it's not. Tennessee is not known as the primary economic engine of the United States of America. Yet, it alone has an economy that is the same size as Iran, at least in nominal terms. So what is the economic future of Iran? If the current regime stays in power, it's more of the same. The current regime really has little incentive to change things because the leadership and the elites benefit enough from the current system. A lot of their security, if internationally, is from being a potential threat, so that they don't get exploited by other powers in the region. And it's really hard to advance. Like if you have all these incentives to ban business and lack of freedom, it's very difficult to develop a dynamic economy, and that's exactly why it's struggled the way it has. However, if somehow the regime changed, and based on current recent news as I'm recording this in 2022, just how bad their economy really is in its current shape, and recent protests going across the country recently have kind of led me to think that I'm not saying that the regime is inevitably going to fall anytime soon, but it's the political climate there is about as volatile as has been since 1979. It's probably a much worse situation, I think, in 1979 than today. But again, like it's a possibility, and if somehow it depends also on how the regime changes. If it continues to be the same type of hardline anti-American stance and willingness to not want to cooperate in the international order, then it doesn't matter whether it's a secular or Islamic regime. If they continue that foreign policy stance, it will be very hard for Iran to grow. But if Iran decides to be more open to international trade and become less aggressive geopolitically, then Iran was probably going to boom, and it will be prosperous for decades and probably be the fastest growing economy in the world for the next decade. I mean, Iran has a lot of potential. It's a very highly educated population. The demographic curve hasn't bent against them yet. As you've seen with the diaspora in other places, the Iranian community has the potential to do a lot of great things, and they are energy rich, and they're located strategically right between Turkey, the Middle East, and China and India. So, and control the Strait of Hormuz. So they have a lot going for them. It's just that they need to improve their leadership. And if they do that, then the sky's the limit for Iran. I mean, it could at least catch up its GDP to China living standard levels. And based on that, that'd be a 4x in their economy in relatively short time. And it could possibly grow even more. So that's my view, really. It's more of the same and more pain as long as the current regime or somebody similar to them is running the country. But if for somehow Iran changes and opens up its economy, then it's going to boom like China did in the 90s and 2000s. So it's simply that binary. Let me know what you think about Iran, its economy, and how precarious is the regime there. I really don't follow the political news day to day in Iran that closely, so I would love to hear your comments and learn more about the subject. If you like the type of content here, please like and subscribe and share, and thank you for watching today.